In August 1966, one of the strangest unsolved mysteries in Brazil's history began on a quiet hillside near the city of Niterói, across the bay from Rio de Janeiro. Two men were found dead, lying side by side on a grassy slope of Vintem Hill. There were no signs of struggle, no injuries, and no weapons nearby. The oddest detail was that both men were wearing lead masks, the kind used to protect against radiation, covering only their eyes. There was also a cryptic note found with them that mentioned a specific time and instructions to take certain pills. To this day, nobody knows exactly what happened, and over the years, the case has grown into a mix of science, conspiracy, and even alien speculation. This is the story of the lead mask's mystery, told in simple language, but in full detail. On August 20th, 1966, a young man named Jorge da Costa Alves was flying his kite on Vintem Hill when he noticed something strange. From a distance, he saw two bodies lying in the tall grass. At first, he thought they might be asleep, but when he got closer, he realized they were not moving at all. Frightened, he ran down the hill and told the police. When officers arrived, they found two dead men lying side by side, neatly dressed in formal suits, wearing waterproof raincoats and the mysterious lead masks covering their eyes. Each mask was hand-cut, like they had been made for personal use rather than bought in a store. The men also had a notebook, an empty bottle of water, and some towels. There was no sign of a fight, no blood, and no evidence that anyone else had been there recently. The police were puzzled. Who were these men? And why were they dressed like this? The weather was warm. There was no reason to wear raincoats. The lead masks were the biggest mystery of all. They covered only the eyes, as if meant to protect them from something very bright or dangerous to look at, like radiation or a blinding light. The police soon identified the bodies as Manoel Pereira de Cruz and Miguel José Viana, two men in their 30s who worked as electronics technicians from the town of Campos dos Goitacazes, about 200 kilometers away. They were friends and business partners who repaired televisions and radios. Both were known to be responsible, hard-working men. They left Campos a few days before their deaths, telling their families that they were going to buy electronic equipment in Rio de Janeiro. They said they would be back soon. However, when police investigated, they found that the two men had taken a bus to Niterói instead of buying parts. Witnesses remembered them looking calm but slightly anxious. They carried a lot of cash with them. A waitress at a local bar recalled serving them lunch on the day they died. She said they looked tired but polite, and one of them asked for a bottle of water, which they later carried up the hill. It seemed that they were waiting for someone or something. The notebook found with the bodies was the most puzzling clue. It contained a short and strange message written in Portuguese. Translated into English, it said, 16:30 be at the agreed place. 18:30 ingest capsules. After effect, protect metals. Wait for mask signal. This simple note raised more questions than it answered. What did the agreed place mean? What were the capsules? What did protect metals or mask signal mean? Investigators wondered whether the men had been involved in some sort of secret experiment. But with no clear evidence, they could only guess. The police began an investigation immediately, but the case quickly became complicated. There were no signs of violence or poisoning on the bodies. Unfortunately, the autopsies were done several days after the men were found, and by then their internal organs had started to decompose because of the heat. The coroner could not determine exactly what caused their deaths. There was no alcohol in their systems, but because of the decomposition, it was impossible to test for other chemicals or drugs. This lack of clear evidence made the mystery even harder to solve. The only physical clues were the lead masks, the note, the water bottle, and the towels. Police found that the men had bought the materials for the masks themselves before leaving their town. A local shopkeeper said they came to buy thick lead sheets and tools to cut them. When she asked what they were for, they said it was for a scientific experiment. No one thought much of it at the time. Manoel and Miguel were both skilled technicians who often worked on radios and televisions. They were also known to be interested in spiritualism and science fiction, especially in the idea of communicating with spirits or extraterrestrial beings through radio waves. During the 1960s, Brazil had many groups of people experimenting with psychic science and electronic spiritualism. The idea was that certain radio frequencies could allow people to contact the dead or beings from other worlds. Some called it aparelhos de comunicação espiritual, spiritual communication devices. The two men had taken part in such experiments before, and according to friends, they often talked about receiving messages from beyond and preparing for a big encounter. Once the news spread, the Brazilian media became fascinated by the story. Journalists quickly named it the Lead Masks Case, or O Mistério das Máscaras de Chumbo. There were several main theories about what happened, each more unusual than the last. Accidental overdose. The simplest theory was that the men took drugs or capsules believing they would help them experience visions or contact something supernatural, but they accidentally poisoned themselves. The note about ingesting capsules seemed to support this. Maybe they expected to stay alive, but the pills were too strong or toxic. Scientific experiment gone wrong. Some believed the men were testing a new kind of communication device or radiation detector. As technicians, they might have been experimenting with electronics that emitted dangerous radiation, hence the need for lead masks. They might have been exposed to something harmful or suffocated during the process. Religious or occult ritual. Others suggested that they were part of a secret spiritual or religious group that practiced rituals involving chemicals and light. In this view, the mask signal could refer to a bright vision or divine light they expected to see after taking the capsules. Murder or scam. There was also a possibility that someone tricked or murdered them. Since they were carrying cash, they could have been robbed. However, their money was later found untouched, and there were no wounds, so this seemed less likely. Alien or UFO connection. Finally, one of the most popular theories in popular culture was that the men were trying to contact aliens. The phrase mask signal was interpreted by some UFO enthusiasts as referring to a bright light from a spacecraft. The lead masks could have been meant to protect their eyes from the brilliance of an extraterrestrial encounter. The 1960s were a time of intense UFO fascination around the world. In Brazil, there were several reports of strange lights in the sky during that period, especially near Rio. According to some newspaper accounts, locals claimed to have seen a bright orange object flying over Vintém Hill on the very evening the two men died. Others said they heard a loud explosion or a flash of light. None of these reports were ever confirmed by police, but they added fuel to the alien theory. If Manoel and Miguel truly believed they could communicate with extraterrestrial beings using radio waves or rituals, it's possible they planned a meeting with such entities. The note could have been instructions for preparing their bodies or minds for the encounter. Ingest capsules could mean taking something to help them enter an altered state. Protect metals might mean covering their equipment to shield it, or perhaps shielding themselves with the lead masks. Wait for mask signal could refer to the moment when they expected to receive a vision or contact. The masks remain one of the most mysterious elements of the case. They were not full helmets, just simple eye coverings made from thick lead. Why would anyone wear them? If the men were expecting a very bright flash or light from an explosion, radiation, or even a supposed UFO, the masks could protect their eyes, but they would do nothing to protect the rest of the body. Radiation, for example, affects all tissues, not just the eyes. So if this was about radiation, It didn't make sense. The fact that they cut and shaped the masks themselves shows that they believed they needed them for a specific reason. This detail made investigators think that the men were acting on personal beliefs or instructions from a group that was not based on real science. Police went to Campos dos Goitacazes to talk to the men's friends and families. They learned that a few days before leaving, the men had told other technicians they were working on a secret experiment that would result in something very important. One of their acquaintances mentioned that they had previously attempted a similar experiment before, but had to stop because it became too dangerous. This earlier attempt involved strong lights and mysterious noises. Investigators also found a workshop where the two men had been building electronic devices. On one of the tables, there were coils, wires, and diagrams for antennas. They were apparently interested in building something that could receive or transmit unusual signals. There was also evidence that they had read about high-energy radiation and how to protect themselves from it. Despite all these clues, the police could not find a definitive cause of death. The case was eventually closed without resolution. The official report listed the cause of death as unknown. There was no evidence of violence, and the autopsy could not confirm poisoning. The story slowly faded from the news, but it never disappeared from the public imagination. People continued to discuss it in books, radio shows, and documentaries for decades. Over the years, the lead mask's mystery became a symbol of the strange intersection between science, spirituality, and the unknown. Investigators, both amateur and professional, have continued to study it. Some later researchers focused on the psychological angle, that the men may have suffered from mass hysteria or delusion, believing they were on the verge of a great discovery or divine contact. Their deep involvement with spiritualist ideas could have led them to perform a ritual that unintentionally killed them. Others take a more rational approach, suggesting they may have taken LSD or another hallucinogenic drug that made them hallucinate or caused an overdose. The problem is that this cannot be proven because no proper toxicology tests were done in time. Still, the theory fits with the note about ingesting capsules. There are also those who connect the case to broader UFO wave incidents in Brazil during the 1960s. In 1966, there were reports of strange lights and flying objects across South America. Some UFO researchers think the men might have been part of a small underground group that tried to contact extraterrestrial beings through radio experiments. Such groups did exist in Brazil at the time. If they believed they were about to meet aliens, they may have taken steps to prepare themselves mentally and physically, hence the note and the lead masks. The phrase, "one alien signal," comes from later writers and documentary filmmakers who suggested that the men may have believed they were receiving messages from outer space. As radio technicians, they were familiar with electromagnetic waves, frequencies, and static. They could have picked up an unusual or unexplained radio signal, something they interpreted as intelligent communication. Excited and perhaps obsessed, they might have decided to meet wherever they thought the signal was leading them. The agreed place on the note could have referred to that meeting point. They might have truly believed they were chosen to make contact with beings from another world. This idea sounds fantastic, but in the 1960s, many people were captivated by the possibility of alien contact. It was the early space age, the time of the first satellites, the space race, and science fiction dreams. If the men were already spiritually inclined, such a belief might have seemed completely reasonable to them. To them, taking capsules and wearing protective masks could have been part of a sacred or scientific preparation. To understand why the story gained such attention, it helps to look at Brazil's culture at the time. The 1960s were full of spiritualist movements that mixed science, religion, and mysticism. Many people practiced spiritism, a belief system based on the writings of Allan Kardec, which teaches that spirits can communicate with the living. It was also the era of rapid technological change. Radios, televisions, and nuclear power fascinated people. For some, the boundary between science and the supernatural seemed thin. The two technicians, intelligent but perhaps not scientifically trained at a deep level, might have stood at that intersection, believing that with the right device or ritual, they could contact higher beings. Modern forensic scientists who have looked back at the case usually favor the accidental poisoning theory. They suggest that Manoel and Miguel took something like barbiturates or psychedelic drugs, thinking it would help them achieve a trance or spiritual vision. Instead, the drugs killed them. Because the toxicology tests weren't done properly, the cause of death was never confirmed. The lead masks, while strange, might have simply been symbolic, representing their desire to protect themselves from a blinding vision they expected to see. Another possible explanation is carbon monoxide poisoning. If they had built or used some kind of device on the hill that emitted fumes, they might have been overcome by toxic gas without realizing it. However, no such device was found nearby, making this theory less convincing. The lead mask's mystery continues to attract attention from writers, researchers, and paranormal enthusiasts. It has been featured in books, documentaries, and online discussions for decades. Each new generation seems to reinterpret it according to its own fears and interests, from Cold War radiation experiments in the 1960s to alien contact stories in later decades. The case represents the eternal human search for understanding the unknown, how curiosity can sometimes cross into obsession. Some modern UFO researchers link the case to reports of close encounters of the second kind, where witnesses see bright lights and experience radiation-like symptoms. They argue that the lead masks might have been a crude attempt to shield against such effects. However, skeptics point out that there is no physical evidence of any UFO activity in the area. No scorch marks, strange residues, or electromagnetic traces were ever found on Vintem Hill. Beyond the mystery itself, the story of the lead masks has taken on symbolic meaning. It reflects how human beings often mix science and faith when confronting the unknown. Manoel and Miguel were not criminals or madmen. They were curious technicians who wanted to explore something beyond ordinary life. Their experiment, whatever it was, cost them their lives, but it left behind a puzzle that still challenges logic. In literature and film, the image of two men lying dead with lead masks has become a haunting metaphor. The masks symbolize both protection and blindness, as if in trying to shield themselves from a great truth or light, they instead hid from reality. The story reminds us that the search for knowledge, especially about things beyond our comprehension, can be dangerous when not guided by critical thinking. Today, more than half a century later, the lead mask's mystery remains unsolved. No final explanation has ever been proven. Most likely, the two technicians died as a result of an experiment or ritual involving drugs or toxic substances, combined with strong spiritual or extraterrestrial beliefs. Yet, without clear evidence, all we have are theories. The story continues to fascinate because it sits perfectly between the scientific and the supernatural, between the rational and the irrational. Two men, skilled in electronics, driven by curiosity, went to a lonely hill, took unknown capsules, put on lead masks, and died waiting for a signal. Perhaps from God, perhaps from the stars, or perhaps from their own imagination. Their note speaks of order and purpose, but their deaths speak of mystery and misunderstanding. Whether it was a tragic accident, a failed experiment, or an encounter with something beyond human explanation, the case of Manoel Pereira da Cruz and Miguel José Viana remains a timeless reminder of humanity's restless desire to reach beyond its limits. And so, The story of the two men, the lead masks, and the mysterious signal lives on. Unsolved, unsettling, and unforgettable.